Welcome to Enlightened Omnivore, the monthly podcast that serves up a delicious mix of food, sustainability, and travel. I'm your host, Steve Sabaker, here to explore the wonders of mindful eating. Get ready to expand your palate and your mind, one bite at a time. Hey everybody, it's Steve Sabaker. This month there's a little bit of a different format for the podcast. My good friend Tyler Dolly, some of you might remember him from episode 7, has offered to interview me this time, putting the shoe on the other foot, so to speak. We talk a lot about my personal food journey. I get vulnerable a bit and talk about my early weight struggles, my farm working experience. We even talk about France and agricultural subsidies. It's an exciting show. Check it out. Looking forward to hearing what you think about it.
Cool, Steve. Well, I look forward to putting you on the Inquisition chair and seeing what sort of data and stories I can torture out of your poor little soul.
I know it's like the shoes on the other foot today. I feel a little nervous.
that's probably a much more polite way of putting it. Maybe we should edit that and post, as they say. But well, this was kind of my idea. I suggested it because I find your kind of story, your journey through food and agriculture and health kind of interesting. And you do kind of allude to it in some of the stuff that you talk about and write about, or maybe even more than allude to it, but you have never really kind of just out and said, this is my journey. This is how I've gotten to be where I am. And so that's what I'm going to try and do today for all of you gentle listeners. I'm going to try and get Steve to open the kimono.
Oh boy. Well, I write better than I speak, I think. So or at least I'm more concise with my writing than I am with my...
That is true. I have been told that I talk, especially when I get on a microphone. So we'll both have to be a little more abbreviated.
Yeah, so warning to the listeners that it's going to be a long one today, probably.
So I think what would be kind of interesting is let's maybe give me your last grocery list. You know, what did you just put in your fridge? And then let's talk about that a little bit. How what's in the Sabaker household refrigerator right now?
Wow. Okay, now I'm feeling very vulnerable. I like to espouse all the rules and what I should do as I say, not as I do. But well, actually, so we're a family of 5, and I've got 3 teenagers. And in the last year, just the sheer volume of food that has been consumed in my house is shocking. But what's really exciting is that some of my kids are getting to the age now where they're more aware of food and how it impacts their life and what they want to get out of their diet. And then I've got kids who are just so starving that it's like, feed me whatever is possibly not nailed down in the kitchen. So we eat a lot of eggs. We eat a lot of ground beef. We eat a lot of chicken breast, even though I feel it's the tofu of animal proteins. And we eat a lot of vegetables and a lot of fruit. So not that exciting of a diet. If you look, I've got a big old bowl of fruit in the middle of the kitchen island, and I buy in bulk ground beef or grind it myself when I have the chance, if I can get a good deal on some cuts. But nowadays, ground beef is cheaper than any cut I could buy in the grocery store. And I buy the best chicken breast I can find in the largest packages. So we got a big freezer, and we fill up that freezer with those staples, as well as I make spaghetti sauce. And we do taco night every week, so there's some tortillas in the freezer, and then lots of fresh vegetables in the fridge. And we are big fans of Trader Joe's, so you'd see a lot of Trader Joe labels, but not a lot of boxed food. And that's one of the things that I really try to stay away from, is anything that has a long ingredient list. But I do like to cook, and I do cook 4 or 5 dinners a week for my family. And it's pretty much a protein, which is almost always animal protein, a vegetable or 2. Broccoli is almost always on the plate, but some
The
other
worst
vegetable.
vegetable in the world.
No way. We love broccoli. You're just not making it right.
Well, I take that back. That was my childhood speaking. Steamed broccoli, because my mom grew up in the era of low fat, whatever. So steamed broccoli and chicken breast with rice pilaf. So I will admit that I do like broccoli the way my wife makes it, which is roasted in the oven with a whole bunch of salt and a whole bunch of oil, so it's like crispy.
Yeah.
So sorry, it was just kind of a gut reaction. I still I hear broccoli and I'm like, ugh, but
I
it can be good.
we used to eat canned green beans, and in fact, my mom, who is right now adding more vegetables to her diet, she came to visit and she brought a bunch of canned green beans, and I was like, "No, we are not eating that." But for her, it's nostalgic the other way. That was what she ate as a kid, so she's like, "I can't help but get these soggy, dark green, muddy colored green beans in me." I was like, "Okay, you'll eat those on your own." We won't be having those, but maybe with some of that cream of mushroom soup and some fried onions, that would be like I think what back in the day that was probably a staple in my house. Not something
Right.
I've made in a while, but yeah, so I mean, it's pretty straightforward because we're a family of five. Kids are starving when they get home, and I've got 20 minutes to make a dinner for them. So I try to prep as much in advance. I cook things in advance. It's kind of boring if you ask me. There's not a lot of fancy sauces or garnishes or sides, but it makes sure that we eat whole foods, which is one of my like critically important tenets. Is like if you can't recognize what you're eating,
Right.
or if it's doesn't if it comes with an ingredient list, it's probably not going on my table.
Well, I think that as much as you're trying to say that you're simple and boring, I mean, realistically, I think we all know that that level of culinary intensity is the exception, not necessarily the normal around here. So I think that's so you said that, I only do whole foods or as much as I can because that's really important to me.
Well, let me be like
Okay,
honest, like that we do eat 4 or 5 meals a week like that, right? But that
sure.
doesn't include lunches, which I have very little control over my kids' lunches. I'll do a big salad with chicken or beef in it. But I mean, honestly, that is the wild card. I have no idea what everybody else is eating, away from my table. And breakfast time is lightning fast as well because everyone's leaving at a different schedule. But what I would say is, I know not everybody's making every meal, right?
Sure.
We as a society, that just seems overwhelming. It doesn't seem efficient, and there's all kinds of things, against that. And I absolutely respect that that's the reality for most people. But I think it's more an emotional reaction than it is a reality for some people. Like it feels overwhelming. It feels daunting. It feels like I don't have the time. But there's been situations folks who put this to the test. Like I think Michael Pollan even did. I don't know if it was a podcast or a TV show, but he did a series on microwave eating, and he ate
Hmm.
for like a week or a month. He and his family of I think four ate microwave meals for a whole month, and they found that it took almost as much time to use the microwave in real time than it did to cook because you had to heat up every item separately. You don't have four microwaves. So if you have four different meals, if you're eating for yourself, like for sure, you can eat a microwave meal faster. I mean, I did it myself when I was, single. I could be in front of the TV eating dinner in 5 or 7 minutes. But if you're trying to make food for a family of four with a microwave, it's 15 to 20 minutes. And that's what I take every night that I'm cooking because I pre-plan the meal or I prepare a lot of the items in advance. So the cooking time has been stretched out over the course of the week.
Sure. I mean, that's totally fair. I I mean, you just said, I pre-plan, I pre-cook, all this sort of things that, maybe our audience is a little more along those lines than most, but from everything I have heard, that attitude towards food is not the norm.
No, no, it's not.
But I do appreciate that you're trying to say, hey, look, I realize this isn't the norm, but it's not that hard. I'm not that amazing. I'm just kind of doing it. So I don't know if people remember from our first podcast, but we actually happened to go to the same group of schools in college. So I went to a college called Claremont McKenna. Steve went to Pomona, and we're the exact same age. And I know when I was at the Five C's, the dining halls were great, and I would just show up and just I ate a lot of hamburgers. I don't remember what else I ate, but I remember the hamburger. They had a hamburger bar. They'd make hamburgers for you on demand every day. I was like, ah.
It was glorious.
I mean, my food philosophy is a little closer to yours these days, but I know back in college, I was just about eating everything I possibly could and then getting what calories I missed in the form of beer on the weekends. I did survive college. So I don't know if you went quite with my liquid diet in college, but I suspect that your college philosophy about food was a lot different. I mean, just a little like, where did you start from to get to where you're at now?
Yeah, I mean, through my whole childhood, I struggled with my weight, actually. I was kind of I was a big boned kid and I was a lot taller than a lot of the other kids, so people were always surprised at how young I was. I mean, I'm 6'1.5" now, and I've been this height since I was 13 years old. And folks used to think I was a teacher in the junior high. I mean, I had a beard at 14. So I was a bit of a man child, but I always struggled with my weight. And when I got to college, I didn't have parents who were, you know, stocking the fridge with only responsible food items. My mom was really strict with food as well. And I mean, like tortilla chips were a splurge in our house, and we didn't, I loved Lucky Charms and would eat it any chance I got because at home we just had puffed wheat, like the generic bags of puffed wheat. That was breakfast for me as a kid. And so when I got to college, the gloves came off. Like it was full contact eating, and the sheer quantities of food in the dining hall were a struggle for me because I mean I would eat like it was my job, and the freshman 15 was a reality for me, as was probably freshman 20 and freshman 30. I think that the heaviest I've been in my whole life was my senior year of college. That might have had to do with the fact that we had a keg of beer in our closet 24/7. So there was a little bit of bro culture choices there for food as well. We had a kegerator, and there was a lot of liquid calories. But, so convenience over connection for sure. Not thinking about eating, not thinking about what food meant to me, just getting food into my body and having more choices than I could ever imagine. Liberal arts colleges have really good dining halls.
Right.
So, but I did love to cook, and we had kitchens in college in the dorms. They often were used mostly for microwave popcorn. But I did on occasion host. I think we made a lasagna one time in the dorm room, and I had to like borrow cooking utensils and containers and things from all over the campus. But we cobbled it together and made some food. And then I had friends who were from other parts of the country or the world, and so getting exposure to their food culture was really exciting. And then I would make all kinds of combinations in the dining hall buffet line too, like kind of make up my own ingredients, build from the salad bar, from the hot plate bar or whatever, and try to come up with new items. But yeah, food was not as precious as it's become for me. It was really much more about fuel. But I also had anxiety about it. I mean, I was always worried about my weight because that was something that, if I didn't mind it, it could get away from me.
Right. Right. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if we're modeling societal change these days or if that's just the evolution of the male brain from, like young and dumb to like older and wiser, but that definitely seems like a pretty typical path.
Well, and I
Um,
think, I mean, I was also a product of that time period where, I mean, I grew up in mostly a woman-led household, and so my mom and my sister and my grandmother and my aunt were often around, and they were like counting calories. It was, the Weight Watchers and all these kind of fad commercial diets. And sometimes they would be on these pre-planned meals that they would take out of packaging. And that was probably the first time I went, what the hell is this? Like, why would you eat out of a box or a bag that looked like something that wasn't even food?
mm,
And had like exact number of points. They didn't even have calories on it. It was like a point system and you just ate like dial by numbers, eight by numbers kind of situation. And I remember, now I've actually used Weight Watchers myself, and other things like that, and they work. I'm not, I mean, they work really well for some people. So I'm not critical of it as much as I was just kind of blown away that like it took all of the love out of food and it
Right.
made it seem really sterile. So that was probably one of the first things that made me start to think about my connection to food and where I just had this visceral response to somebody else's approach and really, recognizing that true nourishment or enjoyment of food goes beyond calorie counting and dieting, and that cravings for me and I think for a lot of people are often, a natural response to malnutrition or going without, denying yourself. It's like often when I'm hungry, it's because I'm really thirsty, like I haven't had enough water for the day, or because I haven't had enough protein, or I'm tired. I haven't, I didn't sleep last night. So then I'm automatically, I'm like, oh wow, I'm eating a lot right now because of something that has nothing to do with the need for calories,
No, I mean, you're just like, why am I eating? I'm not hungry, but I gotta eat. I'm just starving, but I'm not hungry.
right?
The
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, our bodies are so weird. I'm like one of those paleo type, Neolithic only type food, like create a perfect utopia back in the day where that sort of mindless eating was probably a good thing because there's no way you could possibly eat a bad thing. And if there was a good thing, you needed to eat as much of it as you possibly could so you could store it as fat because it was only going to be there for a little bit. So
Yeah.
it's just like, how do you create a lifestyle where only good things are around you? But
Well, and I think about it too. I mean, I think about it in kind of three ways now. I mean, this was not in my college years, but I think, I talk a lot about regenerative and, regenerative agriculture to me just makes total sense. And I know there's a lot that still needs to be uncovered about it and how to make it more scalable and is it cost effective? And it's certainly more expensive right now. But for me, food that is rebuilding our capacity to make more food seems the most intuitive model you can come up with. And that's how I define regenerative agriculture. It's like if we're not extracting carbon or energy or soil from the system, but we're in fact replacing it or at least breaking even with it, then that's a model that I can get behind. And I think when I eat, I look at the things that I eat a lot of, and that's what I decide should be regenerative because I know that you can't make everything regenerative. It's expensive. It's also the access to it. Not everyone has, a beautiful ranch like yours. So it's hard to get these things that we know are going to actually be not only nutritious and rebuilding to our bodies, but also to the environment. But I can buy things like ground beef and chicken breast and sweet potatoes and cauliflower from regenerative sources. And those are like four of the staples that I think are in my fridge every week. Salad, or lettuce. We call it
mhm.
salad in our house because we've got some French speakers. And um, so lettuce is another one. I can't keep lettuce in the house. My kids all eat a lot of lettuce. I know that's not always the case with kids, but my kids are relatively rabbit-like. And so we make sure that it's, organic regenerative lettuce. But, I mean, I also have soy sauce in the cabinet and I have carrots and I have apples and I have cheese and I have, milk and I have all these other items. And sometimes you can't find those sources or you can't afford them. And so I feel like I really focus on volume first. But then I also think about resilience, and what I mean by that is like a diverse diet. Like you were talking about cardio or paleo. I did Whole 30 a few years back and actually wrote about it when we had a blog for the butcher shop. And it was incredibly successful losing weight and actually feeling pretty good about myself, but it was incredibly restrictive in terms of a diet, what I could eat and what I couldn't. And I felt like I could only eat white things. And I was sick and tired of eggs by the end because that was all I could eat in the morning. But this Whole 30 kind of high protein, restrictive diets, and there's all kinds of them. I'm not picking on Whole30, but that's where the enlightened omnivore concept kind of came from for me, was when I saw these diets and I could see results temporarily, but nobody I knew could sustain it. I mean, you can only eat that way for so long. You can only eat vegan for so long. I mean, some people really struggle with these commitments to these restrictive or rules-based diets. And I just feel like diversity is the key, man. I mean, that's a great superpower of an omnivore, is that we can eat anything. And if you look at all the animals on the planet that are the most resilient to climate change, and I mean, like coyotes, they're like incredibly resilient because they can eat anything.
Right.
And, they have a lot of, they're resilient in their social structures too, and a lot of other things. But because they have a diverse diet, they don't rely too much on any one food or any one source, or any one climate. And I think that's a huge opportunity for us too. So I kind of, at that macro level, think of it in that way. But then I also just enjoy all the choices and know that if I'm fixating on any one thing, maybe there's something there. Like if I have like an addiction to, what was it we were eating all the time? There were this like these oh those pretzels with the peanut butter in them from Trader
Oh yeah.
Joe's. Or on occasion, we like every weekend it's a special occasion, so we get those the little ice cream cones. They're like little drumsticks that are like dipped in chocolate. I'm like, we've bought this every week for 4 weeks. Like, okay, hold on, we need to mix things up. Like it's time to change the menu because getting into those habits. I mean, alcohol, carbohydrate, I love making nachos on occasion. And it's like, wait a minute, when was the last time I had nachos? It's like I try to mix that up so that I don't get into these habits that then I associate with my normal lifestyle. Like if I can be diverse in everything, I can be more resilient both from a climate perspective, from a health perspective, and just kind of from a mental health perspective.
Okay, so that was 2 out of 3. We had regenerative, we had resilience.
Yep.
You said you had three. What's the other? I feel like there's another R coming because you're the type of dude who's going to have 3 R's for us.
Yeah. Wow. That alliteration. I love alliteration.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, this one might be a little more woo-woo for people, and I don't talk a lot about my woo-woo side on Enlightened Omnivore, but restorative is the third R. And for me, the philosophy on food, the most important ingredient in any recipe for me is love. Like food has to have an emotional quotient to it. And if food isn't restorative, not only to your nutritional, your body, but also restorative to your mind and spirit, it's like why are we're wasting our time here? And I don't mean that we should be emotional eaters. That's not what I mean by restorative, where it's like, oh, I feel this comfort food. I feel better because of this food. But it should nourish us in social interactions. It should nourish us in, kind of like the conversation at the dinner table, encouraging people to sit with each other. It's such a digital age nowadays that there are very few times that we get together with other people except around a meal because we can't text our food to each other. And so at my house, the number one time I see my kids is at the dinner table. And I find that that is as important a component of our meal is connecting emotionally and spiritually, as it is physically, getting the nourishment from the food. So yeah, I feel like I talk about that, when I first launched Enlightened Omnivore, I talked about it being the dinner table. I mean, I want the conversation with my readers, with my listeners. I really want to hear from them and learn from them. And I do that with my friends and my family, and I do it with myself too, like restorative when I cook. Like I listen to music, I seldom listen to music in my day. If I have free time and I have headphones on, it's normally a book on tape or a podcast. And so when I get into the kitchen, I can't listen to podcasts or books when I'm cooking for whatever reason. I get distracted. So I love listening to music while I'm cooking, and I love pouring myself a glass of wine or it's almost like the time you have in the shower where you have all these great thoughts because your brain
Mm,
is in neutral. Like that's what cooking can be. It is for me. And I feel like that it's just so restorative when I have a moment to myself where I can be thoughtless about anything other than sautéing these onions or chopping up this mirepoix for my spaghetti sauce or something like that. So
that's that's good stuff. We got our three R's. It's a triplet. It's alliterative. Awesome. So what I'm hearing is, on the path from unenlightened to enlightened omnivore, I feel like you would downplay yourself and not say you're very enlightened. But what I'm listening to you say is, to me, seems like a relatively enlightened philosophy around food. That's probably a good name for a newsletter. Enlightened Omnivore. I like it. It's a good one. But I want to see if I can't try and be a fancy interviewer here, and let's go back a little bit. So we know where you're at now. We know where you're at in college. It feels like there had to be some inflection points between college and now. So can you think of one of the first moments where your food philosophy trajectory kind of got knocked loose, and where you're like, oh, I'm going to do something a little different? Because not everyone who went to the 5 C's ended up with a butcher shop that specialized in regenerative grass-fed meats, right? There had to have been some odd things that got you to that point. Odd as in unique. I fully support it because, of course, I'm a rancher. But the yeah. So what do you think? What was one of the first things that kind of changed you out of just food as calories and enjoyment to like food is resilient, restorative, and regenerative?
yeah, I think the first thing is I grew up a military brat. My folks were in the Air Force and we lived all over. I went to 10 different schools before I landed in junior high. And I think every kid who's been every military brat will tell you, you got to learn how to make friends quickly. You got to be open to change. And it's a transient lifestyle. But it was mostly a suburban, or I wouldn't say urban, but certainly a suburban lifestyle. Like I was definitely a city mouse. And then I ended up in a community just south of Sacramento that was very rural, and it was on the up. It was growing. Tract homes were going up every day at lightning speed, but the vast majority of the folks who were born and raised in this town had a direct connection to the land. They either lived on a farm, maybe they weren't farming anymore, but they lived on land, or they worked on a farm. We had a farm at my high school, and a very active 4-H program. And at first, farming was not cool to me back then. I don't think it was really cool to most mainstream pop culture. I think that's changing now. I think a lot of people are getting more and more into going back to the land, which I think is great. But at the time, Saved by the Bell did not have a farm.
Saved
So
by the Bell didn't mean saved by the cowbell.
no, exactly, exactly. And there was this real tension between the rural towny kids who'd grown up in this town and the kids who'd moved in because, the bedroom communities were going up at lightning speed and their parents worked in Sacramento but wanted a good education and a cheap house. And so we city kids or city mouses had tension with the country mouse. And over time, I got exposed to that country lifestyle and found, I mean, I would never have admitted to it, but, getting in the car and turning on country music or going to a friend's house for a sleepover and willingly going out and working out in the yard, or, going to get the livestock or feeding the pigs, those things started to happen in more and more regularity. And then, kind of like you, going to CMC and me going to Pomona, I showed up at Pomona College, and boy, did I feel like a fish out of water. I was no longer one of the smarter kids in class, and also not one of the wealthier kids. I mean, there was a lot of wealth that came to that school, and I'd grown up pretty middle class, middle America kind of experience. And so I realized that the one thing that was different about me than everyone else was that I had grown up in this town that had farms, and I knew a bit about dairies and about how to slop the pigs and, about how to raise chickens because I'd seen my friends do it and I'd helped them do it. And in some cases even worked in those, in those kinds of businesses. And so I got to college and I just embraced my rural experience in high school and kind of almost became synonymous with that. With a lot of people kind of realized that I grew up in a town that was different than theirs because a lot of folks had grown up in real cities, who were at college. And then after college, I actually in Israel, I was an archaeology student, and I in Israel, I would go there each summer to excavate, and then I got to stick around. They pay for your plane ticket if you're going to come dig. So, or I got a grant or something like that. But I could stay the rest of the summer if I could find a job. And in Israel, whether you're an Israeli or you're an American or you're anybody, they'll let you work on those kibbutzim, anytime you want. They've got plenty of work to be done. So the kibbutz system out there is all these like communal farms. And so I just stayed on the farm and worked. I worked in the refit, which is their dairy. I worked in a hatchery. I actually went out and laid irrigation in cotton fields. I got to do a ton of stuff like that each summer when I wasn't excavating. And that, I think, connection to the land from a kid who, before he was 13, didn't know where his milk came from, to now 20, 21 years old, had these really physical, tactile experiences in agriculture kind of at the beginning of when this was starting to make sense for people. I mean, this was in 99, 1998, 99. This was not our big organic revolution that the back to the farm movement that's been the last maybe 10 years or 15 years. It was either a bunch of old hippies or a bunch of old communist Israelis or a handful of kids who were in my town that couldn't wait to get off of the farm to go, to the big city. But I fell in love with it and I got it. I think the romantic notion of it too. I want to go and live on a farm and raise my food and feed people with it. And that shaped my philosophy on food. It wasn't the reality. I mean, I went to New York City soon after college and got a desk job. So it wasn't a reality that I achieved early, but it was the seed was planted, I think, in those several years, especially in the summers of college where I was working the fields and telling people that was my new identity, was like, oh, this is something that's exciting to me, and this is what I want to be when I grow up.
That's yeah. I think there is an interesting dichotomy of a person who has some sort of liberal arts degree, but actually has worked with their hands. That I don't know. Maybe it's because who I am, but I find these sort of people very fascinating because that they are not just doers, that they can kind of get into the emotion and the philosophy behind what they are doing, and that it really opens up what used to be and still is mostly considered a dumb profession of agriculture, where if you spend a little introspection time to look at the various components of what you're doing, it is like the most foundational component to human existence, that the immediate connection to the land, to what sustains you. I don't know, like there's just so much stuff there that you can get in there to unpack. Smart people have written about it and just hanging out with these sort of people. So I totally get how that weird, somewhat dichotomous experience of going to Pomona, but actually working with your hands over the summer. You're kind of like, yeah, it's totally cool.
Well, and
Um,
and I mean, I've met a lot of ranchers and farmers like yourself over the years, and I would say, well, this, it is the most dynamic. Like everybody thinks that they're going to, it's slow times out on the farm. Like every day is problem solving. Every day is a challenge. Every day is different. Even though you're doing things habitually or routinely, nothing is routine on the farm. And the
No.
moment you get somewhere, a water line is broken, or somebody forgot to let close the door behind them, or, there's a flat on the tractor or whatever. I mean, there's just so many different variables. And what I find fascinating about farmers and ranchers is that you guys solve problems all day long and sometimes make it look so effortless, but it's not. It's hard and stressful work, and you just have to keep moving. And I think for me, that was so fascinating. And so, I mean, having then gone into a more corporate type job, and I did healthcare public relations for 15 years, I never felt as alive as I did when I was running irrigation pipe for the cotton fields in the middle of the Shfela of Israel. Like I didn't have the same emotional connection to my work, and I certainly didn't feel at the end of the day like I had accomplished half of what I had accomplished when I was working in a hatchery or working on the land. And now I also know that there's another side to it, and it can be it's a labor of love, but it's also a labor of challenges. And so I don't want to romanticize it too much, but that was what got me hooked on food and food culture, was just seeing people raising these animals and these fruits and vegetables, and just maintaining these systems. Like a farm is a fascinating system. It's like a little factory, and you got to keep all of the cogs moving. And when you don't, when one stops moving, like the whole system can kind of come off the wheels. And so that can be scary to some people probably, or overwhelming, but for me it made it feel like I mattered a lot more because my inputs into that system were essential, as was everybody else's who was contributing to it. Whereas in corporate America, I could see people kind of falling asleep in the afternoon or taking a long lunch, or never really performing at a level that I thought we all should be performing at, and they got to stick around. And I never saw too many weak links on the ranch.
No, we get rid of them. They're I mean,
You
not
feed them to the
not
pigs.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Shoot, shovel, and shut up. Um, so
I've seen Yellowstone. I know what goes on.
you're right.
Yellowstone's like
Yeah.
no joke.
There is a surprising amount of truth to Yellowstone and current ranching culture.
Well, and I think that is again what I love about that show, because I'm kind of I'm not a closet fan. I'm quite open about it, but I've watched, every season. I think I've been savoring the last few episodes, so no spoilers here, but I see one, the romantic side of like ranching, like we're making like cowboys into this, romantic archetype of Americana, which is beautiful entertainment, but not reality. And then the second thing is the conflict between development and agriculture. And that's something that is very close to my heart. I've seen projects like the Marin County Agricultural Land Trust, MALT, and seen farmers. We lost a local farmer here just outside of Claremont here in Los Angeles, a beautiful educational organic farm that was lost because the landlord sold the land to a Walmart distribution center. And so they ended up losing their lease and moving off of this farm of like 40 years that, my kids went to with school to learn about the food system. And so you see how agriculture and urbanization, or development and agriculture, can be in conflict. And that's something that I think, a lot of people will interpret it. And I think politically it's very powerful too, because we associate it with colors of states when I don't think that's fair either. But there is this constant conflict between the country mouse and the city mouse. And I say that's a big part of my identity and my upbringing. And I like to be in the middle. I like to dance the line. I like
Right.
to go out and be able to talk shop with my farm friends, and then I can put on a suit and give a PowerPoint presentation in a corporate boardroom. I think I like being with the farmers more, but I can do both. But I also realize that there is a need for both worlds, and for our food system there's a need for both worlds because farmers alone can't make sure that regenerative agriculture priorities become law, and city folk don't know what that means unless they've been exposed to seeing soil that looks like moist chocolate cake, rather than the dust that's blown around in the Central Valley now. I can't believe what's happened to California in my lifetime, and
Right.
and seeing the soil degradation and the reliance on factory farming and the disintegration of the quality of our produce. Like strawberries used to taste amazing, and I can still get some awesome strawberries here locally because there's a handful of strawberry farmers who are still raising strawberries in a responsible way. But the moment you get them from the Central Valley or Oxnard or you know the huge farming operations that are literally tenting hundreds of acres of land in black plastic so that it bakes all of the biology out of the soil so they can pump it full of gases and synthetic fertilizers, and then they get these bright red strawberries that taste like water that probably have no nutritional value, and we're like, oh, that's success, because I can charge for this big beautiful heavy strawberry. And yeah, I find that that's shocking that we would consider that a good choice. But I digress. I'm
I don't
getting
know. I obviously don't disagree with you at all. And I suspect that our listeners probably don't disagree either. But it feels like there is a lack of clarity as to what to do about it. I think we're all in pretty much agreement here that you and I are kind of uniquely positioned to be able to put some action behind our philosophy. I get to raise super awesome chicken and really regenerate this chunk of ground that I got lucked out to be born on. You got to run a butcher shop for a while. You run this really cool newsletter and podcast. Not everyone's kind of where we're at, where we can kind of directly affect change. So I was going to, and I have a weird perspective on life, right? I've only never been on the ranch for 4 years. I have a very skewed sense of what reality is for most people. So when I'm like, yeah, you just kill a steer and put it in your freezer and eat your own grass fed beef. That's really not a solution that many people have access to.
right.
Um, so what can we kind of learn from what we're doing? What sort of things can people listening to us think about and kind of help them? Because the cool thing about food is it kind of, especially regenerative food, is it hits our personal health, it hits our environmental health, it hits our kids health, our generational health, it hits our societal health, right? What would you say would be some of the key thoughts? I know you've talked to me a lot about food policy and that I am aware that it exists and I think it's a good thing to change, but I'm in the weeds of actually raising the chickens. So maybe, if you have some thoughts on how some of these people can actually not just vote with their dollars, but vote with their actual votes, or vote, by talking to their politicians. Like, let's see if we can't kind of put some little things that people can actually start implementing in their lives here.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there. And I mean, I'll be the first to profess that I don't know that my suggestions are going to have huge impact. But talking about kind of in the kitchen, what can we do? I'm a big believer in, like I said before, in Whole Foods, and not the company, not the grocery store, but in the concept of foods that you recognize. What is Michael Pollan says, eat real food, not very much.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great rule to live by. And so choosing foods with ingredients lists that are short is really important. And I know that seems probably second nature to most people, but you'd be surprised even at some of the more popular healthy grocery stores when you look at the pre-prepared food items, the number of ingredients and binders and additives and preservatives that are put into these things, and sugar, I mean, it's just like a shocking amount of calories that, I don't add sugar to my spaghetti sauce, which I make a big batch of like 2 gallons of twice a month. And you could add a little bit of sugar if you look at the recipe, it even calls for it, maybe a tablespoon in a gallon or two of spaghetti sauce. But when you look at what is put into spaghetti sauces that are bought at the grocery store, it's shocking. It's shocking how many more calories are in this food that doesn't need to be. I mean, no one's complained that my spaghetti sauce wasn't sweet enough. So I think it's simple things like that, like looking at the ingredients lists, making a commitment, especially if you want to save some money, to doing a project, a food project, just like you would do, a chore around the house, or rake the leaves, or clean out the pool skimmer, or whatever it is that we try to do so that we don't have to pay someone else to do. Like, I've gotten to the point now where my kids are getting old enough too, where I can put some of these tasks on them. And so, teaching them how to cook is often a great time saver for you, because then they can start cooking the hamburgers while you're making the rest of the meal, or they can make a batch of spaghetti sauce when they're hungry rather than you have to do it, in advance. But but yeah, choose those foods with an ingredients list that you can understand. Look for ways to make food in bulk and store it. Like, make sure you've got a freezer that isn't full of stuff you don't eat, that is only there to be filled with the things that you want to make a lot of once and use throughout the month or throughout the year. And I watch a lot of social media folks who come up with recommendations on what to do. And really what it comes down to is it's mindfulness. It's thinking in advance about what you're going to eat. And that is so hard, because what we want to do when we're hungry, we can't think about anything but putting food in our bodies. Or when we're stressed after a long day of work, most people don't decompress by going to cook for their families. So limiting those barriers to good food by pre-planning, by prepping your food, and by making large quantities all at once that you then divvy up into portion sizes. I use those deli containers, what we, call delis in the restaurant and food industry. So I just portion those out and label them with a Sharpie and put them in the freezer. And then it's super easy to make spaghetti when my kids are hungry, rather than, oh, I need to plan in advance. But then I also think that, like, I hate so switching gears a little bit, I hate the gym. I don't like the concept of going to a physical space that's designed for me to get exercise. I would much rather walk to the store, or go on a hike, or do some chores in the backyard than go lift weights or get on a treadmill or use the elliptical machine. And even if I do that at the gym, I've got to be doing something else. Like, I've got to be watching a show or reading a book on tape, or I can't go to the gym just for the sake of physical fitness. And I feel the same way about cooking. It's like, if I'm going to cook, I want other benefits from this experience. I mean, I get great spiritual benefit from cooking. It's relaxing to me, it's meditative. But most people don't. I think a lot of people have baggage and trauma, or it's not their thing. But if you can incorporate it into your family, where it's a way to connect with your kid, or, it is a stress reliever, or, there's a component to education, learning about another culture, or, I mean, there's just so many ways to make it more than just fuel. And when we think of food only as fuel, that's when I think we lose that restorative nature of food and cooking. And that's when it makes it really hard. It makes it the worst chore on the list that you want to outsource to anybody else. And that's when you call for Thai food, or, you get a pizza delivered, because you're fed up. You don't, this is not a benefit to you. It's purely transactional. And in my experience, that's when I overeat. It's when I, eat things I shouldn't. And it's certainly contributing to a part of the factory farmed massive food industrial complex that is the US agricultural system, because we want food. We make a ton more food than we eat. Most of the food we make either goes overseas to other places or gets thrown in the trash. Like, the vast majority of the food that is produced on this continent is not consumed by anybody, and certainly not consumed by Americans. And so it's it's a shame because that's why the costs are higher. That's why the environmental cost is so high, and that's why farmers have come up with all these ways to create massive amounts of food on very small parcels, or control the variables, because they need to produce enormous quantities of food for the system that is mostly a wasteful system that throws every pound of food it makes, it throws one away. um, what are we doing? We if we actually only ate the food that we needed, there would be no hunger, there would be no environmental problems. There probably would still be the same number of farmers. They just wouldn't be, plowing millions of acres of soy and corn. They could probably grow some vegetables again. They probably could have their own, a smaller scale farm or ranch, because the demands wouldn't be so high. So I don't know. I feel like, and that gets into the policy thing, right? Which was your other question. Um, I've been to a lot of different countries. I've had the chance to even work on farms in other countries, and both in Israel, in Morocco, in France, especially, and on my aunt's small farm, if you can call it that. It's more of an olive grove. She doesn't raise any other animals or plants. She has a small potager, like vegetable garden for her personal use. But the neighbors around her are all doing some kind of agriculture, and it's shocking to see the quality and the local nature of the food. Because in France, rather than subsidizing for yield or subsidizing for corn and soy, they're subsidizing for quality and for diversity. And so farmers aren't making good money in France off of their produce. That is some of the best produce I've ever eaten. They're making money off of the subsidies because the government is saying, we want there to be a local food system. We want there to be a diversity of and a quality of food, because culturally in France, people are very concerned about quality of food. Here in the
Mhm.
US, if you buy one of those strawberries, from Oxnard that tastes like water, you just accept that that's the reality, even if it costs $5 or $6 for a pint of strawberries. In France, they will bring them back to the market and give them back to the produce seller and be like, I want my money back, or give me another one, give me a better one. And so
Right.
there is an expectation in that marketplace that I love. And we can fantasize all we want about us Francophiles who love France. I married a French person, so I've got some strong opinions there too. But it really is, whether it's about quality or not, it's about how the government is structured in its funding of the agricultural system and support of the agricultural system. And in France, it's not about yield. It's not about, hey, I'm going to give you a grant to make twice as many strawberries. No, it's about, how can you make the best strawberries in this community and then market it in this community so that people want to come here, either as local tourists, as regional tourists, or as international tourists, and come to this town because of the strawberries, or because of the cantaloupes, or because of the basket weaving. I mean, there's like all kinds, like people, they're growing grasses in the Camargue region, and they're making these cavaillon melons that there's a whole infrastructure around celebrating food quality rather than quantity. And that's not a complex policy situation. It's just a value statement. It's just the country has made a decision. They're still spending billions and billions of dollars on agricultural subsidies, but they're not putting it in cars or feeding animals with it. They're like, no, no, we want to feed human beings nutritional, tasty, special food. And I think that we have that potential here in the US too. We can make those changes. They're going to take, it's, there's a lot of entrenched interests in the farm bill, and I do think this is an opportunity. We're at an inflection point where we can start demanding higher quality and at least higher nutrition, so that our foods are better for us, because the way we're raising them now, we're taking all the nutrition out of them. And kids are, I think they said, I was seeing data that kids are actually shrinking, not because they're getting fatter.
Mhm.
Obesity is juvenile obesity is at its highest levels, but kids aren't getting as tall as their parents were because there isn't as much nutrition in the food that they're eating. And that just seems a crime to me. It seems a travesty of the system, and we need to be more active in communicating the things we want because I do think the democracy works that way. If people complain enough about the things that they want, um, politicians love giving people one thing that they want. They ignore all the other things, but they'll, if you're going to pick one thing, I mean, if you call up your congress member and you say, "Hey, I can't get on the phone to get my passport." I remember one year we were about to head to France and I looked and my passport had expired. And I was like, "Oh my God, I have 2 weeks before we're taking off. There's no way I'm going to get my passport." And a friend of mine said, "Call your congress member and complain to them." And I was like, "You're kidding." And they said, "No, do it." So I did. And they helped me get my passport. They had a staff member actually help me to get my passport. And I was like, "Why are you willing to help me with this and not fix the damn farm bill?" Let's
Right.
obviously we know why, but point being, like, they do listen to their constituents about things, and if we can be targeted, and there's lots of organizations that are empowering people to be advocates for this stuff, and maybe I'll make sure that they're in the article on the podcast, but yeah, I guess I'm optimistic to think that, okay, policy wise, it's not that complicated. If we just say we want nutritious food and we want more diverse food, not more corn and soy, why can't we have that?
Right. No, that's the corn and soy is ridiculous that so if California were a nation, its agricultural output puts it in the top five. I don't know. We're insanely productive out here and we're insanely diverse. We have 400 different crops or whatever it is that I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's a lot. So, but when you look at the farm bill, that the subsidies for the agricultural, food produced in California is called specialty crops. So one of the world's largest, most productive agricultural regions in the world, everything we do out here is specialty because all the subsidies go to corn and soy and wheat in the Midwest.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think people don't realize that as much that, strawberry farmers are not getting a lot of subsidies.
Zero.
Yeah, poultry ranchers are not getting a lot of subsidies. It's the vast majority is focused on these high yield cereal crops. And I'm not vilifying corn and soy. I like corn. I do eat some soy products. My son loves edamame. We have soy sauce. Soybean oil is still something that you can't get away from. It's in every single food item you eat at a restaurant. Although I've written about why I don't have soybean oil in my house. But point being, it's not those farmers' fault. I'm not vilifying Kansas and Iowa and Indiana farmers for raising corn and soy. It's a perverse incentive. We've created so much reliance on these subsidies that farmers are great at making a buck from the system. Like, they know how to squeeze every dime out of what they're raising or how they're running their farm. And I would do the same thing.
Right.
But when the system penalizes, I saw this in meat as well, the system penalizing people trying to do it better or at a higher quality or just differently. And this isn't as much the case now with the USDA, but there used to be so many restrictions on small processors and small, even retail operations like our butcher shop, because of the need for food safety. Originally, it was to protect us from E. coli and bad meats and vegetables, and cleanliness and hygiene and all that good stuff. But then it became incredibly prescriptive to the point where no small business without huge investment from some outside person who would never see a return on their investment would be able to open up an operation. And now there are grants that I've heard about, and actually several of my ranching friends are like, "Yeah, we can get a $2 million grant." Like, USDA called us and offered it to us, but no way in hell are we going to build a slaughterhouse in this town or a packing house in this community, nobody wants it, or it's way too much liability, or we can't afford the labor. And so, they'll build the building, but then who's going to run it, and who's going to permit it in their community? So these are all things that I think at the local level, you can have a huge impact on encouraging, preserving agricultural land in your communities. So farms like the one that I talked about, Amy's Farm was the name of it, and they had to close last year. But other farms have been protected because of programs like Malt and other agricultural land trusts that are all over the country that are really trying to preserve and protect small farmers from developers who are, doing their job too, which is we got to build houses. We've got housing shortages, all over California. But the agricultural land tends to be the easiest to take. One, because it's not very lucrative to be a farmer, and so it's enticing when someone offers you a big paycheck. And there's a lot of debt in farming, and some people have no other choice but to take the payout. But also, the restrictions on them, it's a lot easier to convert a big flat piece of land than it is something that is not easy to farm, if it's on a hillside or in a gully or in a community. So I feel like the sprawl effect is as big a risk to our agricultural livelihood because we need local food. The more resilient, again, this goes back to my resiliency comment. It's like if we saw this with COVID, when we centralize meat production and processing, and there's a pandemic, you shut down 5 buildings, you shut down 90+% of the meat produced in the country. Even though there was plenty of animals out on the land and plenty of food, we couldn't process it through the 5 doors that the system had required. And so now, I think about local food as as much a food security issue as it is, a regenerative hope. It's about keeping food close and keeping a diverse number of sources open in case something shuts down half of the system. We at least have the other half and it can run independent. So yeah, I think continuing to go out there and advocating for your local farmers and ranchers, asking them what they need. I know you're not as big into the policy angle, and I think most ranchers, want to be ranchers and farmers want to be raising the food, not talking to Washington about it. But I do think there's some great organizations out there that are making efforts. And if you can do one thing, I'll plug Civil Eats, which is a great publication,
Oh,
online, free magazine that talks about these issues openly. And there's lots of organizations that they highlight and promote that could use some advocacy from our
mhm.
community. Um, and you can get, connected with the local farmers and ranchers in your area that are trying to raise food the right way.
Although farmer markets are not a requirement, eat as many plants as you can that were grown locally. Farmer markets obviously make it easy, but
Yeah,
what's your feeling about labels? I mean, do you care about certified organic and certified regenerative, or are you more of a, hey, just get it local and check the farm if you can? What's your feeling about labels?
I do care. I think organic still means something, and I think at the very least, if organic is affordable, it's not going to hurt you, right? Like you're not hurting the system by choosing organic, you're helping it. I do think, you need to be mindful of, often I'll see 2 products in a grocery store, let's say like basil, and it's like organic and regular. And if you look on the back of the label, they came from the same place or they came from the same distributor. And you're like, yeah, they're probably the same exact basil. They just slapped organic on one of them because they're both probably being raised organically. It's like, so that's the thing to be careful about is there is some abuse in the system. And then, I mean, like, especially some animals that are raised organic, they're getting that grain, if they're fed grain or soy or corn, it's probably coming from overseas. And there's no viability to determine if that grain was actually organic. They'll say it's organic, especially stuff coming from China or from Turkey or from other countries that have very lax rules on shipping and oversight. And so then you're like, okay, I'm buying this organic chicken, but it's raised on feed from China. So am I really getting organic chicken? So, I mean, I've seen that happen. I know that it happens. It's frustrating, but I do think on the whole, at least organic is steering away from some of the practices that are causing the degeneration of our agricultural system and our soils. But to your point, I think local, which everybody says buy local and go to the local farmers market. I've found solutions beyond just the farmers market that are local.
Hmm.
And, people vilify big box stores like Costco. But I actually went into Costco and they have these organic eggs. And right now there's a huge avian flu issue. And so everybody's having an egg shortage, and California is no different. And I went up to one of the managers at Costco, just like literally like up at the front of the store in the customer service area. And I said, "Hey, I'm curious where you guys source your eggs." And I thought for sure he was going to come back to me and say a distributor name, which in the meat industry, we all know, like there's distributors all over the country that source proteins and eggs and everything from all different places. And then they often rebrand them and label them. And sometimes they'll even call it a ranch. It'll be like Happy Cow Ranch, and there's no Happy Cow Ranch. Happy Cow Ranch is a distributor that buys beef from 100 places, puts it in a box that says Happy Cow Ranch, and then sells it like it's a ranch. Well, the same thing happens in the egg industry. So I just assumed he was going to tell me a distributor, and then I was going to do my homework and call that distributor. He told me the name of the farm. And I was like, wait, you buy directly from the farm? He's like, no, we get it from a distributor, but we get these eggs. And it was a farm in Riverside, not 30 miles from my Costco. And they're organic eggs. And I was like, well, shit, I will buy that. Yes, I will
Right.
buy that every day of this week. And I said, how, do you guys switch it up? And so I think if you ask the question, I know a lot of people don't know what to ask, but if you ask, where does this come from? And they say, oh, it comes from here, you can Google that. You can do a little bit more research. If you're eating like we are, 2 dozen eggs a week in my house, easily. We eat a lot of eggs.
Hmm.
I want to make sure those eggs are what I think they are. So I'm going to do the research on it. Am I going to check to see if the frozen edamame that I get at Trader Joe's once a month for my son is organic and where it comes from? No, I'm probably not going to. But if I'm eating 10 pounds of chicken breast, 7 pounds of ground beef, and 4 dozen eggs a month, I'm gonna find out where those things are coming from. And especially if I'm buying them from the same place almost every week because it's the best deal. Like we all have
Hmm.
found our best deals, and so you go, or it's the closest store. So if you have your regular haunts that you're going once a week, or I mean, we go several times a week grocery shopping because I have such a hungry family, but then you can start finding those sources. And if you can't, reach out to me because I love doing this stuff and I'll help you find it. There are sources out there and social media and community members who have done the homework. We all have that friend who nerds out on this stuff, and rely on them because chances are they've done their homework already, and there are options and you can find them. And so I'm a big believer in that. You also learn a lot about your food system. And if you make it educational with your kids, it instills those values in them, which is that's the big thing about all of this when I talk about the restorative nature of food. There's so many, we think about what are we going to do with our kids? Got to give them more activities, got to get them outside, got to get them away from the screens. Like there's so many things we can do in the house with our kids that are educating, that are showing them, us being good role models, and that are teaching them life skills that they're going to need to be successful. And cooking is a huge one. Like even if you hate cooking, you should teach your kid how to make pasta and how to cook a hamburger patty, and understanding the principles of saute versus searing. Like these are simple things that you can Google on YouTube and it can teach you 5 minutes before you teach your kid. But when we teach our children things, it instills a higher value and a higher sense of importance than if they find it on the internet themselves, or they learn from a kid, at school, or it's about sharing and imparting wisdom. And that I think is so important when it comes to the things we put in our body. And so I mean, I could talk all day about ways to educate our children about the food system and the fact that everywhere that you look, they're getting no positive reinforcement of food, online, in school, in pop culture. There's nothing that's telling them that, a balanced meal is not the food pyramid, or it's not, a Lunchable, or it's not even a three-star Michelin meal that they might see on Chef's Table if they're watching, the shows that my
Mhm.
kids are watching. None of that is real food.
Right.
And so I feel like we need to accept that, yeah, we're not going to be making crazy complicated meals every night of the week. I don't do that, but I'm making this food because I know it's better for me than buying it from the restaurant or making it out of a box. And even if we do that once a week but we make a big deal out of it. Hey, we're making a meal together once a week because I want you to see how food is made. I want to know what I'm putting in your body is good for you, and I want to have a conversation with you around the dinner table at it. Do that once a week. You don't even have to do it that often. If you do it once a week, it will have a restorative benefit to the family, and it will enlighten all of us to be better about our food system, and to treat ourselves to some good food once in a while that we made ourselves.
You missed a moment to say we become enlightened omnivores. You could have really plugged the title of the newsletter. You were that
Okay, I'll
close.
try it. I'll try it again. But well,
No, 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 you missed it. It's over. Um, yeah. So I guess that was great. Yeah, getting the kids, and it's always the next generation, right? Getting the kids involved. But I think were we to peel that onion back, we'd be talking for another hour or 10. So if I were to sum up what I heard you over here the last hour is, you have restorative, we have resilient, we have regenerative is kind of your high level reasons to eat big food or good food. And then basically, if you just have to decide that you care, right?
it comes down to sharing. I think it's
Mm.
all about sharing. And we've lost the importance of sharing with each other. And I don't mean like sharing our toys or making sure that, everybody gets something. I mean, when I have something that I find interesting, I'm going to share it with my community. If that's my kids or my wife or my buddies, America is such a social country. And people around the world always say Americans are too friendly. And we're losing that connection because we're not sharing with each other in a more face to face, analog way. And I can't think of a better way to share than to break bread together and to make food together and to sit around a table together. And it's cliche to say, but having dinner once a week with your family is clinically proven to probably be one of the best things for your children and for you. And I I'm so crazy passionate about that part that I feel like if we don't absolutely treat it like it's medicine, like this is like medicine for the soul, then we're the patient who chooses not to take their prescription, and yeah, if you don't take your cholesterol pill, your cholesterol is not going to go down. If you don't take your sharing pill for the dinner table, you're not going to have a more balanced life. And that's the piece that I think continues to be diminished in society, is we just are not being more present and in the moment and sharing with each other. So,
Okay, well, I was trying to sum it up, but you wouldn't just summed it up way better than I did. We need to share more. So, yeah, Steve, thanks for letting me turn the tables on you, return the favor of you grilling me.
thanks so much, Tyler. This has been fun.